I worked intake at a county jail outside Portsmouth, Ohio for about a year. I was 26 then and mostly worked overnight shifts, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Small place, older building. The electronic doors always buzzed louder than they needed to. Most nights were pretty routine. Drunk arrests, paperwork, guys in detox yelling for coffee or cigarettes. Around 3 inches the morning, things usually quieted down enough that you could hear the laundry machines downstairs. There were only a few of us working nights, usually me downstairs and an older deputy named Wilkes upstairs doing rounds. Wilkes had been there forever. Every night around midnight he microwaved the same canned soup. You always smelled it before you saw him. The inmate everybody ended up talking about came in sometime in late November of 2018. Middle-aged guy, quiet, no gang tattoos, no attitude. He got transferred from another county after some fight in a holding area over there. During booking, I was fingerprinting him when he looked up toward one of the monitors and asked, "They ever fix that camera by laundry?" I said, "What camera?" "The one downstairs." Then he just kind of shrugged. I didn't think much about it then. I actually didn't even know there was a broken camera near laundry until maintenance showed up a couple days later. After that, he started making little comments once in a while. Nothing threatening, just stuff he probably shouldn't have known. One night he said, "You're early today." I had come in maybe 15 minutes early. Another night he said, "Wilkes usually checks this side first." Things like that. Mostly it just got annoying. He said everything so casually that it was hard to tell if he was messing with people or if he was just observant. Around that same time, I found paper stuffed into the little window on an unused maintenance closet near D Block. The closet stayed locked most of the time. When I opened it, there were cigarette butts on the floor. That stood out because nobody was supposed to smoke anywhere inside. I asked a couple trustees if they knew anything about it. Nobody did. Wilkes figured maybe one of the maintenance guys had been sneaking breaks in there. Then tools started disappearing from downstairs storage. Nothing expensive, just random stuff. Pliers, a screwdriver, one flashlight. Administration blamed staff for most of it. A few nights later, I parked farther behind the building because somebody else had taken my usual spot. Around 1 a.m., the inmate looked at me through the cell door and said, "You still driving that dark blue Chevy?" I asked him how he knew what I drove. Seen it before. Maybe there was a way to see the lot from somewhere in the building. I don't know. But I'd never noticed one. After that, I started paying more attention during rounds. Little things kept turning up. A mop bucket near laundry would already be filled before cleaning started. One of the hallway lights downstairs would be shut off for no reason. A storage room door near processing kept getting left cracked open around the end of shift. Every single thing by itself had a normal explanation. That was part of why nobody really treated it seriously. Then, one morning near the end of shift, I went downstairs to bring extra supplies near laundry processing. Wilkes was upstairs doing count. As I walked past the maintenance closet near D Block, I noticed the door was partly open, maybe 6 inches. The light inside was on. I figured somebody from maintenance forgot to close it, so I walked over and pulled it open the rest of the way. The inmate from D Block was sitting inside on an upside-down bucket, just sitting there. He looked up at me like I'd interrupted him. I asked, "How'd you get down here?" He didn't answer. He just said, "You should probably lock that outside gate better." Real calm, like he was pointing out a loose shelf or something. I backed out and radioed Wilkes right away. Other officers came downstairs maybe a minute later. The inmate didn't fight anybody. He stayed sitting there until they moved him. Afterward, they checked one of the old service entrances near laundry and found signs somebody had been messing with the lock. Apparently, if the latch didn't fully catch, you could work the door loose later without setting off alarms. After that, the jail replaced locks, checked cameras, all that stuff. What bothered people was that he clearly knew the building too well already. It didn't feel like somebody figuring things out for the first time. At first, everybody assumed he'd only managed to get out once or twice before getting caught. Then maybe 2 weeks later, after he'd already been transferred to state prison, Wilkes was going through old maintenance reports during break. He found paperwork showing the broken laundry camera had stopped working almost 3 months before that inmate even arrived at our jail. Wilkes stared at the report for a second and said, "That doesn't add up." I asked if maybe another inmate told him about it before transfer. Wilkes just shook his head. Then he folded the paperwork up and changed the subject. I left corrections the next year. The hours were bad, and honestly, the whole job wears on you after a while. But that situation stuck with me longer than most things there did. Because either somebody had been feeding that guy information before he got there, or somebody else had already been moving around downstairs long before anyone noticed. I still don't know which is worse. I did 6 months at a minimum security federal prison camp outside Tucson in 2021 for tax fraud. White-collar stuff, nothing violent. Most of the guys there were in for similar things. Fraud, embezzlement, tax charges, insider trading. A lot of older professionals waiting out short sentences and trying not to make problems for themselves. I got assigned to laundry detail maybe 2 weeks after arriving. Honestly, it wasn't bad. You stayed indoors most of the day, and the supervisor mostly left us alone as long as uniforms and bedding were finished on time. The dorm I stayed in had around 50 inmates, open bunks instead of cells. After a while, you got used to hearing coughing and snoring all night. Everybody eventually learned everybody else's routines without really trying to. The inmate people talked about was a guy everybody called Ray. I never found out if that was his real name. Late 50s maybe, thin guy, glasses, quiet most of the time. Not rude or antisocial, more like the kind of person you stopped noticing after a few minutes. Ray volunteered for extra laundry shifts constantly. Early mornings, inventory, cleanup work late at night, stuff nobody wanted. At first, I assumed he just liked staying busy. Then I noticed how interested he was in schedules, mostly staff schedules. He'd ask things like, "Who works Tuesdays now?" or "Mail still comes before lunch." One afternoon he asked if the education officer quit because he hadn't seen her car in several days. Nobody thought much about it because Ray never acted threatening. If anything, he came across helpful. After a while, though, he started casually mentioning personal stuff about inmates that I couldn't figure out. One guy got divorce papers in the mail, and somehow Ray already knew about it before the guy said anything publicly. Another inmate lost commissary for a week, and Ray made some comment during laundry folding. "You'll need soap this week." Just weird little comments. I figured gossip spread fast in places like that. It usually did. The first thing involving me happened maybe a month after I started working with him. I found a folded note inside my laundry bag. At first I thought somebody mixed up property until I opened it. It said, "Don't trust people near rec fence." No name or anything else. I figured somebody was messing around, so I threw it away. Then another note showed up a few days later. "Stop talking to Martinez." Martinez was just an inmate I ate lunch with once in a while. I asked him if he knew anything about the notes. He laughed and said people got bored in prison. That probably should have been the end of it, but after that I started noticing small things around my bunk getting moved. Nothing stolen. Just moved enough that you noticed. My shower sandals would end up under the opposite side of the bed. A paperback book near my pillow showed up bent open halfway through. Once a family photo disappeared most of the day and turned back up inside my locker under folded shirts. Nobody admitted touching anything. One afternoon during laundry duty, I walked past the administration hallway and saw Ray near the door with a mop bucket. The mop wasn't moving. He was standing there listening through the partly open doorway while staff talked inside. When he noticed me looking at him, he smiled a little and pushed the bucket away like nothing happened. Around then, fights started happening in the dorm over personal information getting around camp. Phone numbers, family issues, legal paperwork, money on commissary accounts. Guys started accusing each other of trading information for favors or snitching. 3 inmates requested bunk changes in the same week because they thought somebody was going through their belongings at night. Nobody officially blamed Ray, but people definitely stopped talking around him as much. Then one night around 2 a.m, I woke up needing the bathroom. Most of the dorm lights were off except near the exits. I saw somebody standing near the front entrance. At first I thought it was a guard doing count. Then I realized it was Ray. He was just standing there facing the rows of bunks. I stayed in bed watching him for maybe 20 seconds. Then he started slowly walking between bunks. Not searching through things, just looking around. Every few beds he'd stop for a second before moving again. I remember him standing near Martinez's bunk longer than the others. I finally woke the inmate below me and whispered, "Raise up." The guy looked down the row once and immediately grabbed the wall phone by the bathrooms to call the overnight officer. By the time the officer finally came into the dorm, maybe 5 minutes later, Ray was already back in bed. The officer mostly seemed irritated. "What's going on?" Nobody really knew how to answer that. He walked through the dorm, looked around for a minute, then left. The next morning, one inmate realized legal paperwork was missing from his locker. Another guy found pages torn from his address book. About a week later, staff searched Ray's locker after somebody reported him privately. They found notebooks filled with information on inmates and guards. Schedules, family names, visitor dates, debts, medical appointments, relationship problems. Just pages of notes. I remember one officer flipping through the notebooks for a long time without saying anything. Ray got transferred not long after that. Nobody ever explained what he intended to do with all the information. I finished my sentence 3 months later and went home. Honestly, the notebooks weren't even the part that stayed with me. It was thinking about how long somebody had probably been standing near my bunk at night while everybody slept. I still think about that sometimes. I used to work at a warehouse in Lexington with a guy named Danny who had done time in eastern Kentucky before I met him. We worked second shift unloading appliance trucks. Quiet guy, probably early 30s then. Most nights he barely said much unless somebody talked to him first. One night during break, somebody brought up prison escape stories after watching something on TV, and Danny ended up telling this story. He wasn't trying to sound dramatic about it either. If anything, he sounded kind of unsettled by how much of it still didn't make sense to him. He said he was doing time for burglary charges at a medium-security prison somewhere in eastern Kentucky around 2011 maybe. Could have been 2012. He wasn't completely sure anymore. He worked maintenance detail because he'd done construction work before prison, mostly plumbing repairs, hauling supplies, patching leaks, regular maintenance stuff. He shared a cell with an inmate named Curtis. According to Danny, Curtis was the type of guy who stayed out of trouble by paying attention and keeping his mouth shut. The first thing Curtis noticed was the rec yard. Danny said there was one far corner of the yard that stayed muddy most of the year because drainage there was terrible. There was some old runoff structure back there that flooded constantly after rain. Supposedly, the cameras covering that area stopped working all the time too. Most inmates stayed away from it because your boots got soaked walking through there. But Curtis started pointing out that certain inmates spent a lot of time around that area during morning rec. At first, Danny figured Curtis was just bored and watching people. Then one morning during chow, Curtis told him, "Quit sitting over there." Danny asked why. Curtis said, "You talk too much." That was the whole conversation. Danny told me prison was full of vague warnings like that, so he didn't think much about it at first. Guys were always suspicious about somebody being connected to gangs or gambling or informing. A few days later, though, Danny started noticing the same group of inmates hanging around the flooded side of the yard almost every morning. Usually 3 or 4 of them with push brooms or trash bags acting like they were on cleanup duty. Except they never really cleaned anything. Mostly they just stood around. One guy usually watched the guard tower while the others stayed near the drainage structure talking quietly. By itself, none of it sounded that unusual. Then maintenance started finding dirt inside parts of the prison where it shouldn't have been. Not huge amounts, just enough to notice. Mud in utility hallways, dirt near boiler access doors, dusty footprints in storage rooms nowhere close to the yard. Danny said one of the older maintenance workers kept complaining because it hadn't even rained that week. He kept saying, "Where's all this dirt coming from?" Nobody knew. Around then, Curtis started acting different too, checking the cell door more than usual at night, watching who walked past their tier, stopping conversations whenever certain inmates came near them. One night during count, Danny heard banging sounds under the shower area. Not loud, more muffled. He said it sounded like somebody hitting pipes somewhere under the floor. Another inmate heard it too and joked that the plumbing was falling apart again. A few days later, the prison partly shut down the showers for maintenance. Danny remembered Curtis watching officers tape off the area without saying anything. Then the same inmates from the rec yard started showing up at chow with dirt under their fingernails and cuts on their hands. One guy had his wrist wrapped in toilet paper like a bandage. Nobody asked questions because that usually created more problems than it solved. Danny said Curtis finally got serious about it maybe a week before the alarms. They were back in their cell late one night after count when Curtis said, "If alarms go off, stay in here." Danny thought he meant a fight or a lockdown. Curtis shook his head and said, "No matter what happens." Danny asked what he meant. Curtis rolled over and stopped talking. Danny told me that conversation stayed with him mostly because Curtis normally didn't warn people about anything. Then one night around 1 in the morning, alarms started going off across the prison. Not full riot alarms, more scattered emergency buzzers from different areas. Danny woke up to officers yelling in the hallway and doors opening and slamming shut up and down the tier. Somebody started banging on cell doors yelling, "Stay inside." Danny said inmates crowded around their cell windows trying to figure out what happened. Some thought there'd been a stabbing, others thought somebody escaped. From their window, Danny and Curtis could barely see the rec yard under the floodlights. Officers were running through the muddy area near the far fence line. Then Danny saw 2 inmates getting dragged across the yard by officers. Both of them were covered in mud. One guy barely looked conscious. The part Danny remembered most clearly happened maybe 10 minutes later. A state police SUV pulled through the outer gate. A trooper got out with one of the prison supervisors and walked toward the muddy section of the yard. Danny said the trooper stopped, looked down for a few seconds, then turned around and immediately started yelling for more units to come inside. Not panicked exactly, just fast. Like he saw something that confirmed whatever they were already worried about. Curtis stepped away from the window after that and sat on his bunk. Danny asked him, "What happened?" Curtis just said, "Too close." That was all he'd say. The prison stayed locked down for several days after that. Rumors spread all over the place. Some inmates said there was a tunnel under the drainage structure near the yard. Others claimed outside people were involved somehow. One rumor was that tools had been getting smuggled in through maintenance deliveries for months. Danny said nobody ever really knew what parts were true. What he did know was that less than a week later, construction crews came in and poured fresh concrete over that entire section of the rec yard. Not small patches either. Big sections. Curtis got transferred not long after. Danny said he asked one officer what actually happened, and the guy just looked at him for a second and said, "You don't want to know." Then he walked off. Danny finished his sentence about a year later. He told me the strange part wasn't really the tunnel itself. It was how many people inside that prison probably knew something was going on for months and acted like everything was normal. And honestly, hearing him tell it, I got the feeling Curtis knew more than he ever admitted. He just understood when to keep quiet.